Alrighty, guys, here we go. I have with me Ornery, president of the Pinochet fan club. We've got John, Invisible Man, Ellison, not Wells, D, the Jew that the Bolsheviks couldn't kill, and we have with us a special guest appearing live from his bunker in an undisclosed location, Browning. All right, so if you guys couldn't tell, we're talking their infiltration of the left and hopefully making a few helicopter jokes along the way for
infiltration.
Right, because they started out so pure and innocent.
I know, right?
I'm wondering how you infiltrate people. It's like raping the willing. I don't think you can do
that. They're a little bit more blatant. Their whole commie thing going than they used to be. But yeah, you guys are right. Commies suck. Alrighty, so let's kick this off. First, Browning, tell us a little bit about your, I guess, your experiences with commies, because you deal a lot in helicopter Twitter, and you guys sort of get into arguments and dust-ups all the time.
Well, I think I'm very grateful to my parents because they sort of saw the writing on the wall. They saw communism encroaching in South Africa, maybe from the wrong direction, but they knew that it was coming. At the time, South Africa is a very strategic asset because the oil tankers have to go very close to the coast to avoid the turbulence at the confluence of the Indian and Atlantic Oceans. So it's a choke point for oil tankers, and the mineral wealth there's some minerals that are highly concentrated that can only be found there and in the Soviet Union at the time. I don't know what the story is now, but vanadium, chromium, and some other rare earth minerals that are crucial to making high-strength steels, particularly for jet engines, rockets, and things like that. So the Soviets very much wanted South Africa, and they were funding Cuban troops to fight in Angola. There was a long-going brush war there, and my parents were terrified that was going to eventually take over South Africa. What they didn't realize was that the globalists would cuck South Africa and have the ANC win that war. Nevertheless, the result was the same in the end, and they're sort of, I don't want to call them communists, but they're communist light, and they're going to suffer the same fate that Rhodesia did when they became Zimbabwe.
Now, I know that like South Africa is kind of like, I have a friend who also is a Mormon, and he was a missionary in South Africa. So like, I mean, he was talking about how they're, I guess he didn't, what he mentioned, I guess, was fairly reminiscent of like actual communism. I was going to say, because a lot of Africa, I guess, was dealing a lot with the fight between fascists and communists, you know. So I guess that's one country where the communists won out, huh?
Pretty much. Yeah, I mean, the ANC is a communist organization. When you look back at Mandela's history, he and Winnie were very sympathetic with the early communist movement there. He sort of learned his lesson the same way Bill Ayers did. You know, they were bombing and agitating for a violent revolution, and he went, you know, I'm just realizing now that he very much went Obama's way. You know, he didn't study under Bill Ayers, but Bill Ayers tutored Obama, and Bill Ayers learned his lesson. I mean, he was bombing in the 60s. David Hines, at H. Radska on Twitter, is extremely well informed on this, but the violence of the 60s, radicals reformed, I shouldn't even say reformed, went underground, and they learned to infiltrate organizations. And so Mandela did very much the same thing during his exile and came back as a sort of messianic figure of peace and et cetera, et cetera.
I was going to say, because I think you also mentioned couple people who, because you mentioned Obama, and I know that he kind of is a good object lesson for how communism has kind of infiltrated the left today. I think a lot of it was through the form of anti-colonialism, like that's why it's taken kind of the form that we see the camps that's left today. That form of communism, why they tend to have love for like the Castros and Che Guevara, that kind of thing. So it's very apparent that communism is very much on the march in that area too. I think that's how it got its original foothold, was through that idea that America's the big bully in the world, and because that was basically Obama's outlook, was we're the bully, we have to be cut down to size, we have to be reduced in the world. So the left, I think, basically operates from that framework. I
Well,
think
that's probably why communism took root in, or various or forms of communism took root in Africa, was because if anyone got shafted by colonialism, it was Africa.
Right, and also the thing is that the other thing is, like I said, that the big fight, like in Nazi Germany when there were the big fights between the communists and the fascists, is more or less that repeated itself through most of Africa, because I've noticed that again, the big fight was between the nationalist socialists and the internationalist ones. So the communist ones were internationalists, and then the nationalists were fascists. And of course, they had different names in different countries. But again, Kenya is a perfectly good example of this, and it's somewhat ironic that Barack Obama Jr. moved more in the communist direction. His father was like a naked fascist, though. So kind of funny that I guess in the generation he kind of swapped sides on that count.
I mean, not to get too much into the whole Obama thing, but he was raised by a single mom or by his grandmother, so it would sort of make sense, I guess, on a psychological level, that he'd go opposite of whatever his dad was.
Well, no, he was raised by Frank Marshall Davis. He was a card-carrying communist.
Right.
I mean,
no, I agree with that. I think the history is pretty clear on that. Who wrote the book on that? I forget. Dreams of My Real Father.
It was Bill Ayers, I think, that ghost wrote it, or he.
No. There's a counter documentary, Dreams of My Real Father.
I've heard that theory that maybe there was more to the relationship than mentor and student.
Well, the only one I'm aware of
that Frank Marshall Davis was very much his real father.
Right. I've heard that theory. I don't know if has that ever been like concretely confirmed, or is it just a lot of connecting the dots?
Well, not like his biological father, but certainly he was a father figure to him. Actually, Obama had several. If you go through, because Dinesh D'Souza, I think, hit this really well. He had the Roots of Obama's Rage was the book, and then he had the documentary. I forget what it was called. It was Obama's America, but that was the one where he kind of went through all this. Obama was shaped by a lot of people, and again, like I said, he's a good object lesson for the way the general left in the country basically picked up the more communist strains, because it was a long process. But basically, they were thinking that if they could, if the Soviet Union supposedly had this idea that if they could basically kind of sour a lot of young Americans on patriotism and focus heavily on how the sins of the nation from the past, stain its history, that they would eventually just give in, and they would basically, by the time they were older and took positions of power, they would willingly, basically hand the country over to communism, which is more or less what happened. It's just the Soviet Union didn't outlast their own plan.
It's the same trick, exactly. I mean, I hesitate to say that it was a beta program in South Africa of teaching people to despise their own heritage. But whether or not that was intentional, it worked very well there. And you have a large contingent of people there who are deludedly celebrating the so-called Rainbow Nation, and despising their own heritage. And when you look at what's happening in Europe and how the educational system pushes the same idea here, you can certainly see the same strains of that, whether it's a program or just an accidental invention. I tend toward a conspiratorial view of it, because I think if you look at the writings of the Club of Rome, the Fabian Society, et cetera, those things were enunciated very clearly decades ago.
Well, it's kind of interesting because if you look at, for example, when apartheid was ended in South Africa, a lot of people that supported apartheid were like, no, if we do this, then we're not gonna live in peace and harmony, we're not gonna get along. The roles will just be reversed, and we're gonna switch who's the oppressor and who's the oppressed. And people are like, that's nonsense, it's never gonna happen, and we need to end apartheid. And then the pro-apartheid people were proven right.
Kind of, sort of. Yeah.
I mean, I know I'm not trying to support apartheid or defend apartheid, but it almost, in every situation where communists seem to get, or Marxists of any kind, intellectual, cultural, de facto Marxists, bona fide Marxists, if they get any kind of control, it almost seems like the very thing that you're supposed to be ending, so racism, oppression, slavery, whatever, those things are bad, but communism always makes them worse. It's like, no, we got to stop these things, and that's why we need communism. And then communism, like, okay, we'll give communism a chance, and then I was like, okay, so more slavery is going to end slavery. That makes absolute perfect fucking sense.
Well, ironically enough, oh wait, ladies first. Go.
I was going to say, Mike, if everyone's a slave, then really no one's a slave.
Right.
But
except the Politburo is not a slave. They're the taskmasters. That's the problem.
I'm being.
Well, yeah, I get
one for all for one. But we all know it doesn't really work out like that. I do want to sort of let John speak and then shift gears. So John.
Okay. Well, because I was just going to say that, ironically enough, all the predictions made, the irony of the 20th century is that it was the biggest refutation of communist theory, because everything they predicted happened almost exactly the opposite of how they predicted, which was that there would be a big proletariat uprising and the capitalist countries would fall. And instead, the proletariat only rose up in their own countries. And it was like everywhere there was communism, the proletariat rose up against it in the communist nations, but never in capitalist countries, because, let's be honest, people living in communist countries had crappy standards of living, whereas people in capitalist countries didn't.
But John, that's not real capitalism. They were communism. They were rising up against their capitalist overlords that
right
didn't exist. They were they're totally selling them a bill of goods, a fake bill of goods about how they were going to bring communism in. But they obviously they did not bring communism in. They brought in capitalism in. That's why I think had to raise up.
I think we can all agree that communism would work if it were not for the wreckers and hoarders.
Don't forget the looters.
Very obviously in Venezuela, the problem is that when food becomes available, hoarders hoard it all. Starved.
Right.
Yes. Well, what's funny, remember a few months ago, there was an article going out about how they decided to hand out rabbits to all of the families in Venezuela to try and take care of the hunger problem so that people could breed rabbits and then eat them. So instead of eating them, they decided to keep them as pets.
That backfired.
I guess they weren't starving enough. Just give them more communism; they'll figure it out.
It's amazing how
they'll get hungry enough if you give them more communism.
It is sometimes amazing, because my cousin likes to always just laugh about this, because he lived in Berkeley for a few years, and he always used to tell me it's so amazing how abject the failure has been of communism, and yet communists are still sitting in seminars in Berkeley yeah, this theory, it will save the world, all of us will be better off for it. And he'd say, this has been the most abject failure in history. How in God's name you still think this?
This is what I find funny. This is what I find funny. You point out, like, communists are in our universities, they're in our bureaucracies, they're in our politics, they're in, you know, they've got footholds in institutions. They control shit. Hollywood is a communist cesspool.
The cathedral.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
Media, government, university.
Right.
The three legs of a stool.
And yet Nazis are somehow the problem? Like, that's what I don't understand, is like, okay, we're going to punch Nazis, you know, all 2,000 of them that are in this country. It's like, okay, get to work, I guess. But I mean, in the meantime, what are you going to do about the communists that are running like half the country? Like, I don't, you know, Nazis were bad. You know, they killed 6 million Jews, 10 million people in about 5 years. But nobody seems to care that the Russian communists alone starved to death 6 million Ukrainian or 7 million Ukrainians in a year. I mean, they did
right,
more.
And that was a small fraction of what they killed overall. I think Stalin's total death toll was, what, 20 million, I think is the official figure. And Mao absolutely put him to shame with between 65 and 85 million.
Yeah, between Stalin and Mao is 100 million dead.
Yes, and yet the greatest evil we're supposed to talk about in the 20th century is Nazism, with a tiny fraction of the death toll.
Right, and another thing too, I mean, the modern Nazi that exists right now is a glorified LARPer. They have no say, no anything. And I mean, I say this as a Jewish person who has maybe a little bit more stake than the regular leftist liberal wingnut. But I mean, I make fun of the people like that are Nazis. Like, there was a guy in my high school who tried telling me that the Holocaust didn't exist, you know, when my aunt's parents had the tattoos on their arms. But he was like a moron loser who wore his grandfather's German uniform to class every day for months on end. We make fun of them. We tease them. They're nothing. So
when you say German helmet, I have to tell you a funny story.
I like funny stories.
German helmet.
We used to play a very politically incorrect game when I was in college. We called it German helmet. And we had a pub on campus, and you had to go to the pub with your fly unzipped. And the first person to notice the German helmet won.
Not where I thought the story was going, but funny all the same. I thought it was going to be like Naruto's like 10,000 years of pain, but
oh
god. and not to put too detailed a point on it, but for the uncircumcised, the moniker really didn't fit. I think we'd have to call it a Pope's hat or something.
Oh my god, really?
We got the German helmet and the Italian mitre. Is that what that is?
Oh my god, that's
that I haven't crossed too much thanks to Jewish law and everything. So I'll just not envision that specific thing there.
Are you blushing?
Yeah.
I think
John,
she is.
I think he's asking you, John.
Oh yeah, you might be.
It's so obvious, John.
I don't know. I could be, but you know, honestly, I guess I'll just wait till I feel a warm feeling in my face, right?
Now that I think about it, maybe there is something to me getting banned from Twitter.
Well, and I realize it's a bad segue, but I was going to say, speaking of Twitter, and also because I'm connecting this because part of, I think, communism's idea for trying to use the American left, and let's be honest, it was always attached to communism anyway, but one of the things I think it used was a focus, because again, you got to remember that, because around the time period that it did it, it was around the late 60s. Around the same time was when black people in particular became their focus. And I think that what they used was the idea that, well, you see, your country can't be all that great because look at what it's done to black people throughout its history. Now, I think that what has happened is there's been a general goal of shaming us about the history, by making us ashamed of the country, that it's not that great. And the way I quantify this is I spent, probably on and off about just 8 straight hours for the most part, arguing with people about it. There was a comment by Ben Sass a couple, was it 2-3 days ago, where he pointed out that that the Constitution was originally written to secure universal human dignity, which of course is attached to individual rights. And the people that responded to it just absolutely went ballistic. They were just like, the Constitution didn't do anything of the sort because blacks didn't have rights. Most blacks in the country were slaves. That's like, okay, but that doesn't mean that the Constitution was written specifically to do that. But that's the way they do it. Their assumption is, if people didn't have all the rights at the beginning, then the only possible reason that could be is because the Constitution was expressly written to take those rights away. So that's really the problem, is that I think that that's being used. And again, it's a lot of it is false history. Like, you can easily go back and realize that this makes no sense if you read the writings of the people who actually wrote them. But we're supposed to believe they all hated black people, and the entirety of American history was just to fight back against what the founders screwed up, and basically was fixing their fuck ups. And the thing is, it's like, no, quite the opposite is true. It was just a lot of compromises had to be made historically, but ultimately the goal was to live up to the principles in the Declaration of Independence.
So, John, I think that's a really great insight. When you look at the scope of all communist insurgencies, one of the key factors is using guilt, societal guilt, as a wedge, as a fracture point, as a stress point, to fracture that society, and to make that guilt irredeemable.
Right.
That to be sure that there's no forgiveness, there's no absolution, and make that fracture point stick.
Right.
It's a real psychological weakness of Western civilization, of the West, of Christianity, and I think Judaism to a degree as well. But I think especially Christian civilization is susceptible to that hack. It's like a SQL injection.
Right.
I think what it is because Marxism, talks about equality, talks about social justice, but really because there's lots of ideologies that want social justice. Christianity wants social justice. It just doesn't believe in using force to do that. It should be voluntary. Where Marxism's real focus is the oppressor versus the oppressed, right? And that was how they were able to appeal to blacks in the 60s. It was by saying, hey, you guys are oppressed. You've been mistreated. You've been abused the whole time that you've been here. And I think, to your point, Browning, you're right. Like, as a Christian society, and I believe you can make the argument that America was, or in some ways still is, a Christian nation, depending on how you define it. But there is that sense of, no, we have a sense of right and wrong. The Constitution was designed to uphold the Declaration of Independence. Well, Declaration of Independence was a moral argument. It didn't say, we're going to make this government, we're going to declare ourselves independent, and we're going to do it because there's no other way to argue it other than say this is the right thing to do. We believe in life, liberty, and property. We believe that
it is axiomatic. Yeah, right. Those were the 3 axioms laid down.
Right. There's no empiricism, in the Declaration of Independence. It's completely a moral argument, and so we are a moral society. We are a culture based on the idea of absolute right and absolute wrong. It is absolutely wrong to oppress your neighbor. And so when Marxists come in and they talk about, these people are oppressed, and you're the oppressor, it's natural, I think, for us to say, I don't want to be an oppressor. I'm not a bully. I'm not a tyrant.
Yes.
I don't want to do that. I feel bad. And if you don't understand what Marxism is trying to do, and I think that's I think is one of the underlying problems. I was just reading an article the other day, and I just pulled it up. So there was a poll performed by the research firm YouGov, and the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation commented on it too as well. But this poll found that 44% of millennials would prefer to live in a socialist country, while 42% would prefer to live in a capitalist country. Another 7% said they would prefer to live in a communist country. And it's like, okay, how do you not know the difference? How do you know that there's really no difference between socialism and communism?
And
I mean,
that's something,
Lenin, sorry, go ahead.
well, I sort of want to drive the conversation into the communist influence over schooling, and specifically like I mean, you see it in colleges and grade schools. So I think this is like a really good segue to go into that. Because really, like, especially like millennials and people my age, you know, they're being taught by communists in colleges and in school. And I mean, they're comfortable, I think, with the boons of society that capitalism has given them in terms of like having brand new iPhones and, you know, being able to afford food and clothes, that they don't really necessarily, like, they think communism is the next step, sort of, so to speak. So, sorry to interrupt you.
Oh, it's okay.
Well, no, like you said, it's a good segue. I mean, I think part of the problem is there used to be a time in this country where, so like, for example, I have my degree in mechanical engineering, right? But my whole experience in college, I feel, was pretty much I'm self-educated. You know, yeah, I paid money and yeah, I went to class, but I didn't really learn anything in lectures. Where I learned was in the labs, doing the homework, doing the research, you know, studying on my own. Like the professors rarely ever helped me do anything. And there used to be a time in this country where that kind of thing was celebrated, where if you were self-educated, if you cracked open a book and you mastered a subject, regardless of whether you got a piece of paper attached to it or not, you know, you were celebrated. That meant you were really smart. You didn't need to go to school. You just needed to crack open a book and learn. And yet we've kind of we've shifted away from that as a society. Now, if you're self-taught, it's like, oh, you don't know anything. So there's that Tom Nichols parody account on Twitter, you know, which is absolutely hilarious because it portrays him pretty well. I mean, I would love to have debates with Tom, except the problem with Tom is once you pin him into a corner, he's like, oh, you're not an expert. I'm an expert. It's like, fuck you, dude. I just beat you. I just beat you in an argument. You know, and yeah, you're right. I don't have a shiny piece of paper, and maybe I don't have the amount of experience that you do, but hell, I can fucking read, okay? Right. I can make an argument like an intelligent human being.
What the hell is Tom Nichols actually credentialed in?
I don't remember. It was actually something intelligent sounding.
I was going to say, is he like another Bill Nye, basically? But
No, he's actually, I mean, in his field of study, I believe he is, I just don't remember what it is, but I know he's an expert. What?
Soviet studies, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was Soviet studies.
Okay. I mean, credit where credit is due. He's an expert in his field. That doesn't mean he can't. That doesn't mean he can shut down an argument every time. Like,
so he's an expert in something that died 20 years ago. It's like being a scholar in Latin.
And you know what? Tying to what schools teach to a lot of kids, and this may not seem fully relevant, but I'll explain. First of all, there's a channel I've gotten like kind of into watching. There's a kind of channel I've gotten into watching.
Big Dick Nichols.
Aiden Paladin. She's actually really good. She's on YouTube. The thing is that there was one clip. I think it was, who was it? Not Jon Stewart. Oliver, whatever Oliver. The one late night guy. Where you remember when Donald Trump Jr. made the comment on Twitter about how he's going to teach his daughter about socialism by taking half of her candy?
Oh, right.
And so what he said to that is, well, no, it's called sharing. And this is, I think, what a lot of people, what a lot of college students think socialism is. So I think basically because one of the things Aidan Paladin pointed out is he said that basically colleges nowadays have become basically holding places for adult toddlers, and that basically children have an assumption. They're very, very big on fairness. They want things to be fair. Problem is they don't recognize the kind of fairness they're talking about. They don't.
Isn't fair.
They don't give, and they also
it's not fair. It's
right.
not fair at all.
Right, and they don't give any thought as to how you would achieve it. And so the thing is that what ends up happening is they say, okay, well, the socialism isn't bad. You're just making it out to be this evil thing. All it is just sharing things with people. And it's like, sure, God, no. Do you realize what that means? But no, I think they don't. They're overgrown toddlers. They're basically people. I think this is true, I'm sorry, of a lot of leftists, but especially campus ones, that they literally, they're toddlers.
So on that note, you guys will be happy. This will give formal education at least one positive. So I'm taking financial management as part of my MBA right now. And the professor that took it, he had us read an article. I can't remember where it was from. It was from Scholarly Institution, but they were talking about capitalism. And the article was really squishy. It didn't really defend capitalism. It didn't attack it either. But it clearly left the door open for state-run capitalism. And the professor was kind of surprised by how many people were like, oh yeah, this was a good article. And I came down on it and I started quoting F.A. Hayek, and I was just like, this article is shit. But
what was the reaction to that among your fellow students?
Some of the students thought it was good. They're like, oh yeah, no, this article brings up some good points. And I'm like, no, it doesn't. Like my argument was, this article does nothing to explain where you draw the line. Like, it says we need to do more, but what is that? At what point do you say, oh, okay, we've got too much state and not enough capitalism? It didn't, and in other areas, it didn't really rock the boat, in my opinion. And what's funny, what I thought was really cool is the professor pretty much agreed with me. Like, he was like, I was kind of surprised that you guys were like supporting this. He's like, this article didn't actually provide enough information as far as like what should be done. And it makes you think, and that's what I wanted you guys to do, but I don't want you to agree with it. Like, you don't have to agree with this article. And somebody asked him about China and state-run capitalism, and his answer was pretty much like that. And I don't know if he's from another country now, because he has a bit of an accent. And I know he speaks like 5 different languages, including Russian. So he might be from Russia. But he's like, yeah, I'm not really big on mind control. So I was like, that's so awesome. I'm going to love this class. This is going to be the best class ever.
And interestingly enough, something else I was listening to recently is that the philosophical reason, I think, why they can't draw that line about where the state stops trying to manipulate what people do and where it ends is, I think, for a reason that goes back to the progressive era, that philosophically, one of the big differences between the left and the right in America is that the left tends to believe that all people's problems can be solved by giving them things, as opposed to the right, who says, no, it's the liberty to kind of construct your own destiny, your own life, as Dinesh D'Souza points out a lot. That what is more important about his coming to America was not that he had a better standard of living, though that was great, but what was better was that his destiny was his own to construct. It wasn't handed to him. It wasn't dictated. He had that right to build his life as he saw fit. And I think this is what the left does not care about. The left really does not see any value, because in their minds, if you look at the writings of old progressives, they saw freedom as chaos. Basically, in their minds, what they saw was the nation is not united in any toward a purpose that's, unwritten part decided by me, and that it's chaotic because everyone's just doing what they want rather than some stated goal. And so they see liberty as chaos. So in their minds, order means you are not free, because being free is bad, and that also all your problems could be solved if you just have the right stuff, and you can't get that unless we can control how your life is run. So I think that
another thing too, that, and this
So-
is what F.A. Hayek actually brings this up in one of his, I can't remember if he brings it up in Road to Serfdom or The Fatal Conceit. Read both, because they're both excellent books.
Agreed. I've read both.
They're amazing.
But you know, Hayek himself was a little bit cucked. I mean, he was a child of his era and actually makes a bit of an argument for social welfare.
Well, to his defense. In his defense, in the early 1900s, socialism was kind of a new idea as far as policy was concerned. I mean, it obviously it goes back farther than the early 1900s, but we really didn't start talking about it from a policy perspective. Prior to that, it was just an ideology, and people tried it out in their little communities, and it failed miserably. But nobody ever heard about it because nobody died. Because you could, when in the 1800s, when people experimented with socialism or some variation of it, it was usually tight-knit religious communities, and they'd give it a go. It'd fail miserably. They'd give it up, and they'd go back to their lives. We didn't really start talking.
They had forgotten the lessons of Plymouth Rock. I mean, the earliest American colonies were experiments in socialism
Jamestown.
that resulted exactly. I mean,
well, and American progressives were very much inspired, because I think where it came back into policy discussion was in the 80s, with the Bismarckian Wohlfahrtsstaat, Otto von Bismarck. That was a huge inspiration to American progressives.
Right, but
I think, yeah.
But my point is that at that time, socialism was still kind of new. We didn't have any examples, really, any recent examples of how bad it could turn out if the government decided that, hey, this is what we're going to do. So to Hayek's defense, it's okay. I'll defend Hayek on this one, that he left the door open a little bit. He didn't come down as hard as he should have. But a lot of people that believed in socialism back then, they actually thought it was a good idea. On paper, it sounded like a great idea, and there was nothing to point to say, no, this is bad. Don't do this. But what Hayek points out in one of his books is how the real appeal of central planning, the real appeal of socialism, and all the various forms of it, is capitalism and free markets specifically. Free markets are what we should be defending more than capitalism, really. Capitalism doesn't mean anything to anyone. It's free markets that matter.
agreed.
And his defense of that was, look, all this stuff, look at all these advancements in technology, look at all this wealth that's been generated, look at how a rising tide lifts all ships, and everybody is better off, including the poor. And yes, there's a huge gap between the very rich and the very poor, but guess what? That's only if you look at society, a snapshot of society today. And that's worthless. What you need to look at is the poor of today versus the poor of 100 years ago or 200 years ago or 500 years ago. And if you look at the poor today versus the poor 200 years ago, well, guess what? The poor are super rich 200 years ago. And as a society, we forget that. We forget there was a time when you actually had to worry about starving to death. You actually had to worry about antibiotics and medicine and how you were going to survive the next flu epidemic.
That was 100 years ago. That was like 80 years ago. And
right.
you look at like the 1930s, where people.
So, hold on,
right.
I'll finish this thought. And so what socialists do is they forget. People forget is how bad it was and how great it is today, and all they can think about is, well, there's all these other problems that we haven't solved yet. There's all these, we're just not solving problems fast enough. If only we could allocate resources better, if only we could spread the wealth, then these problems would be solved. And they're right. They're absolutely right. If we could learn how to allocate resources better, if we could share, if we could spread the wealth in a way that was voluntary, and that's where religion plays a great role, because religion actually persuades you. Religion actually convinces you. You get a conviction. Hey, you know, as a Christian, my job is to take care of the poor. Well, I'm going to take care of the poor the best way I know how, but I'm also going to pursue my ambitions, my dreams, my goals, and I'm going to be better off for it. And we don't, where socialism falls short is in then saying, okay, we want to fix these problems, so we're going to force everyone to share, and then that's where it breaks down. And that was F.A. Hayek's warning. It's like, guys, you can't force people to allocate resources efficiently. You can't force people to get along. You can't force people to give up their dreams and ambitions.
Sure. In programming, we call that the 9 women can't make a baby in a month problem.
Right.
Exactly.
Right.
You know, adding resources. The difficulty in a project is communication overhead. You can't parallelize problems efficiently. Communication is an order of n squared problem. The number, very roughly, but the communication overhead is a square of the number of people involved, where the work is order of n. And this is the fatal conceit that Hayek points to, that central planning doesn't work because the mass brain in the free market is a computational engine far, far, far better than any centralization.
Well, the cat approves. And I mean the other thing I think also is that and I think Mike was also hitting the moral argument on this one too, is again, I think there's still that emphasis on materialism versus a sense of liberty, because again, this also goes back to why I never refer to leftists as liberals. I never do, because they're not. The thing is that term was hijacked. The left, as it adopted more socialist themes, came to think that, you know what, freedom from tyranny is not really that important, because in their minds, your life is based on how much stuff you have. So what's tyranny really? And again, a lot of Europeans I know think this way. So in their minds, their problem with you is that why can't you be satisfied with the stuff we're giving you? And why do you have to have all these stupid notions of being free and left alone by the government? The government's just trying to give you stuff, and who cares if your freedoms get lost with it? Because the only measure of your life's value is stuff. So, you know, and again, this is true on issues like, say, gun control, where I know Europeans who are just like, you know, I tell them, well, the government will be controlling a certain aspect of your life, and they're like, I don't get why that's a problem. You know, they're just like, oh, so the government controls your life. What's the big deal? I think that the American spirit is very difficult to bend. That's why it takes such a concerted effort to get communism to slowly bleed into the culture, because the American spirit simply doesn't count as being controlled. You know?
Also, they want to take our guns too, because that's like
that's
like the epitome of American resistance, the spirit of American resistance.
That has been a wonderful win for us.
Right.
I'm actually a little bit surprised at how vigorously the Second Amendment has been winning over the last 30 years. It's astonishing. I mean, have you all seen that animated GIF of the number of states that have concealed carry laws over the last 30 years?
Right.
It's astonishing. I mean, it goes from red and yellow to green with a few yellow outposts.
Right. And then California, right? Like, you know.
And the People's Republic of Massachusetts.
Oh yeah, that one too. Which is funny because I love the fact that even in Democrat states, this is still a big losing issue for Democrats. Because look at Vermont. I mean, Vermont's about as blue as it gets, and yet you don't touch their guns ever. You don't do that.
We're not going to talk about Vermont because they have more lax gun laws than Texas, and so we just don't talk about that. Okay.
Well, then in that case, forget I said anything. I mean, what's
Thank you.
What's this Vermont place? Anyway, so, but yeah,
No, go ahead. You were talking.
I was just gonna say, just again, I was just pointing back to, again, it's one of those things that we have, since I still wanted to, get on how communism is infecting education, but also actually now that I think about it, it also is infecting the Democratic Party. I mean, look at Bernie Sanders. He's like what, a half step away from being a total communist, and he is actually revered in the party. I mean, you know, how many years did they spend saying that no, we're not socialists? Okay, that's just a dirty word, and they're just trying to scaremonger by saying Democrats are socialists. Nowadays, you say it, and they're like, whatever. Yeah.
Well,
Sounds good.
only an evil conservative bastard would use socialist like a slur. It's like, okay, you know what? You can take our guns, but you can never take our choppers.
Or the guns on the choppers.
Oh, we won't need the guns on the chopper. We'll just give them a nice little helicopter ride.
So I have an interesting anecdote, and I want to shout this out to people who are listening. The fastest way to convert a liberal is to take them to the shooting range. And I don't mean that they're going to be red-pilled immediately, but it is such an eye-opening experience.
It is.
I have a friend in our neighborhood. She's an Indian lesbian woman dentist. And I took her to the shooting range because there was right. I know you can't trust them. And she's a nice lady. And I took her to the shooting range because she was concerned there'd been a few crimes in the neighborhood, and it's a very, very low crime neighborhood, but nonetheless, few break-ins, and she was concerned because she's wealthy and disarmed. Took her to the range, and her words on emerging was, "I feel so empowered." And she's subsequently taken a bunch of tactical pistol training, and just, is very involved. It's a great way to red pill people because it breaks through that mental barrier of, I can't do this. People who do this are wicked. This is a dangerous instrument. I'll kill myself. And when they find out they can control it, it's like the invention of fire. I've tamed this. I can do this. What else have I been told that's false?
I actually had a similar experience with a buddy of mine from work. He is, his parents immigrated here from Mexico. I don't know if he was born here or he came here and was raised here practically. They're all citizens. And I think he was indifferent to politics, but he was open-minded because we were both in sales at the time. And nothing will make you hate the government more than having 40% of your commission taxed every month. So he was open-minded to it. And we had some friends, we live in Colorado, everybody here goes shooting. And me and a buddy of ours, we invited him to come shooting with us. And he got hooked. And now he watches like PragerU, and he like reads all this other conservative media, and he just gobbled it up. But yes, you're absolutely right. Guns are the best gateway drug ever.
Not to mention going through the process. Not to mention going through the process of buying one too, because that actually also kills a lot of those myths about, oh my God, people could just go into a store and just get one, no questions asked, or it's like if I order one online, it's like Amazon, it just shows up at my door in 3 days. And it's like, no, that is not how it works.
It really is the best thing you can do.
Let's be honest here, that should be the way it is, but let's use it against them while we can.
Right, exactly.
It really is the best. If you want to, I absolutely agree. If you have a liberal friend that you want to, if you can't convert them, you at least get them open to your ideas. Take them to the shooting range. So especially an outdoor shooting range on a nice like spring day. Oh my God, it's like the best. It is like the best experience ever. It's the most fun I ever had is when I take like first-time shooters who maybe lean liberal. I actually had a similar experience with another friend from the same job. We took him. He'd never been shooting before, but he knew I liked to shoot. So he's like, well, could you take me and kind of show me how it's done? And he and I, we shot my AR-15. We shot a few handguns. He's hooked. Like he takes his nephews now. Like he talks to his mom about his mom's like, how can you shoot guns? And he's like, come to the shooting range with me, Mom. I'll show you.
Right. I actually have a friend who does this. Actually, he's a friend of mine in the same city with me. That's what he does. Is he goes on Facebook and he just says, "Who wants to go shooting with me?" And literally just tell me your schedule and I'll just show up and let's just go and fire a few rounds. Like that's it. As long as you're willing to like pay for some ammo, then that's it. Just show up. and we'll just go shooting. And I actually love the fact that he does this, because there are a lot of people, me and him both have friends who lean left a lot, and you know, him as a, you know, he does this, and a lot of them have kind of reconsidered, like, oh, maybe this whole gun control thing really doesn't make a lot of sense, you know, or you know, so actually,
you know, it's an interesting point. One of the things we seem to forget is that we are selling mittens and gloves and toaster ovens to Eskimos. Freedom is a beautiful thing. It's fun. It's hip. It's cool. It's something that resonates with the human soul. And instead of selling the sort of dour Puritanism of leftist correctness, we are the new counterculture. I think, what was it? Paul Joseph Watson sells those T-shirts that say conservatism is the new counterculture. But it's damn true. I mean, I've tweeted this, that they are the church lady from the 80s Saturday Night Live. And suddenly we're the cool, fun people, right, which is kind of bizarre because I'm a trad con in many ways.
You're going to have to explain that term for some of our viewers. And
what, trad con?
Yeah. I know it means traditional conservative, but I don't know if that there's more meaning to that, or.
I mean, I hesitate to use that word, traditional conservative, because Conservative Inc. I mock so often on Twitter because they're useless. You know, they are the progressives of 20 years ago, apologizing for it and sipping mint juleps at the country club and, you know, looking pained. But I am a libertarian by ideology. But I have come to recognize over the past few years what the founders did, which is that I'm not sure that they enunciated it, but ANCAP is very much a dream, just like perfect communism is.
I agree.
And
I always tell people, if you want to see what libertarianism, like pure libertarianism, if you want to see what it looks like in actuality, look to the American government under the Articles of Confederation. That was a libertarian government, and it failed miserably.
Or Iceland in sort of the 1400s. They had very much close to what would be considered ideal ANCAP.
And I had to take a class in college called American Heritage, where they talk about the American system of government. I went to BYU, so it was actually very pro-America, pro-Constitution. But the professor I had enunciated, I think, the perfect way. King George is the example of government that was too strong. And our government, arguably, is far more tyrannical and heavy-handed than King George ever was.
Right. We rebelled against 3% taxation.
Right. The Articles of Federation was government that was too weak. The Constitution was the Goldilocks zone of government. It was just right. It was strong enough to rein in people's baser bad impulses, but not so strong as to interfere with their good impulses, and not so strong as to infringe on their rights too badly. And it was designed so that if it ever veered into the too strong territory, or even maybe the too weak territory, then one, it would take a while to get there, and two, the people would be able to rein it back in.
Agreed. Actually, I made that thermo analogy a while back on Twitter, that the Constitution is a saddle point, right? It's if you look at an energy graph it's a local minimum, but it's not the minimum. And it's a very delicate balance, because if you slip off either side of the saddle, you descend into craziness. But maintaining that balance is very difficult.
All the non-nerds are like, what the fuck is he talking about?
So I'm still trying to read through the live chat, because I was just like, if this, there's like a couple people who are just kind of like, it's funny, but what's it? NSD 2327. I was gonna say he's been vocal.
No Slack Delta. What's up, my man?
It said apparently Browning sexually identifies as a Chinook. Don't let him fool you.
Chinook, come on, man. What kind of pussy helicopter is that? I'm a Cobra, dude.
I was gonna say, what is it said that the
Apache
Apache
a hind.
I'm not fat.
Well, I guess we'll never know now, will we?
I mean, we only have your word to take for it, which unfortunately at this point. Okay, so I've been paying attention. I lost my train of thought.
Yes.
I thought I heard the bubbling of a bong in the background.
Bomb or bong?
I'm going to assume bong. If it was a bomb that bubbles, I think we may have a problem.
No,
Chemical work.
funny story though. That should be a state issue. But yeah. Okay. Anyways, talking more about, because you guys were making some points on the Second Amendment, and then I sort of got shut up, P. But I just want to say, like, the whole, I mean, guns are going to be like the thing that keeps us from. Oh, I remember. Okay, Bernie Sanders and the Hillary Clinton wings, those two parts of the Democratic Party are currently warring with each other.
Oh, they hate each other.
Oh,
Glorious.
And it's almost as bad as like Rubio bots versus everyone else on the conservative side.
GOPE versus actual conservatives. But anyways, talking about that, they've been discussing, I mean, watching them go after each other on Twitter is like, because like they really hate each other. But one of the things too, though, it sort of goes into the left's acceptance of socialism, because it looks like the Bernie wing is actually winning in comparison to the Clinton wing. So like the left's acceptance of socialism, communism is becoming more mainstream. I mean, Bernie even, I think, proposed legislation for universal health care, which 10 years ago, probably no one would have ever talked about it. Like in the accusations of the conservatives and right wing would be like, oh, you guys want universal health care, and Democrats used to say, no, we wouldn't do that. But now it's actually being brought up as a viable, I mean, everyone thinks with our next Democrat president, we're going to have universal health care. It's a little bit frightening to me.
Yeah, because it's not too far out of left field to say so.
Right.
See, the most depressing thing about this is the debate we keep having in this country, and it just pisses me off. But the debate we keep having is between Democrats and Republican version of big government. And the debate we really should be having is between libertarians and federalists. We need to go back to like the late 1700s with like the Alexander Hamiltons and the Thomas Jeffersons, where it was like, okay, we need to figure out what's the best way to secure freedom. Should we have a big central government and make, or should we leave it all to the states? Like, we're not having those debates anymore. It just pisses me off.
No, I think those are great points, though. The sort of convergence of the two parties toward a centrist platform is being broken apart now, and we are going to see a disambiguation and a polarization into new parties. The Democrat Party is becoming the party of coastal elites, and the Republican Party is becoming the party of, well, God knows what. The rhinos are falling apart.
Yeah, I would say they're becoming almost the populist progressives of the early 1900s.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I think we're going to see the emergence of two distinct strains, and we can have a real debate instead of this faux debate between how fast we're going to go toward communism.
Right. Well, on that note, if anyone's interested in checking out a third party that is not the Libertarian Party, the new Federalist Party, the Federalist Party, you can follow them at Federalist_USA, I believe is their Twitter handle. And John D and I have worked with them for a number of months now. They actually they're doing some good stuff in the States. They have a good platform. We'll hopefully see that they stick to it. But and if you guys are looking for a third party to look into, that would be the one I'd recommend.
Also, I might point out, the Federalists will make you a promise.
Did we lose our audio?
Huh? Did you lose mine?
Not mine.
Nope. You lose mine though.
This isn't.
I don't know. You can't hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay. I don't know if Mike can, but I was just gonna say, I guess the one promise that the Federalist Party can make to you, that the Federalist Party can make the Libertarians can, is we promise that the chairman will never do a striptease on stage. Absolutely, we can absolutely promise you no stripteases from the chairman of the Federalist Party. That is a promise. I'm telling you, very, very important promise to make right off the bat. So that, I mean, that's got to be a plus right there over the LP, right? I mean,
if that were an infiltration operation of the LP, I would have to say that was the most successful discrediting ever in history.
It's hilarious because the LP screwed themselves in almost every possible way last year. It was so amazing. That literally every possible opportunity they had, they literally screwed themselves every time. They got the striptease of the chairman. They nominate, like, the one guy that I am thoroughly convinced at this point was stoned the entire cycle. Again, all they had to do was nominate Austin Peterson. There was actually a shot, at least they'd have done a lot better. But they nominate the crazy guy, crap, what was his name? Gary Johnson. And then on top of that, what's the deal with them doing, oh, we're gonna steal Bernie's campaign slogan and go Feel the Johnson. I was like, you do realize how bad that's gonna sound, right? I mean, you are aware that probably doesn't work as well as Feel the Burn. I mean, yes, there were plenty of jokes about, you know, the burn is chlamydia, but I'm just saying, Feel the Johnson may not have been the best campaign slogan. Also, not knowing who any world leader was, basically assuming that, acting like you were stoned the whole time, and the LP's chairman strips on stage. I mean, honestly, you could not.
I think they were trying to come across as like, well, we don't have to care about foreign policy because we're not going to interfere with anyone. It's like, guys, come on, you still have to care.
That doesn't work.
You still have to know what's going on. So when somebody says to you, sir, that North Koreans are nuking California, you can at least say, so it's a civil war? What's going on here?
So that's bad. So that's bad.
Maybe that's a bad example.
I was going to say, I think the North Koreans wouldn't nuke their own people. I mean, that's how that works.
So I had a friend of mine over to the compound today, and he's what you would call a traditional conservative, you know, a smart guy, red pill. But he and I used to debate years ago the open borders question, and he debated me during my very, very stringent ANCAP non-aggression principle days, and introduced me to the idea of the bigger gang problem. You know, the idea that, yes, you can have your ANCAP community, but what are you going to do when the tribe 2 states over gangs up on you? It's all well and good being ANCAP in your own community. In fact, and I've got to do a shout out here to one of my favorite sort of nemeses on Twitter, whom I love, a liberal, DM Bean. He makes fun of me for always bringing up the tabula rasa fallacy.
Right.
The big fallacy the communists have is tabula rasa, the new Soviet man. But in many ways, one of the reasons I reject ANCAP, at least in today's society as humans are now, is because we fall prey to the same problem, the tabula rasa fallacy. We think that if only people were perfectly free and there were no state, we would all cooperate and live in peace and have free market. It's bullshit.
No, right. No, so there's a duality to man, and freedom is how you reward the good parts, but there's a bad part to us too that needs to be reined in. I had a thought and I lost it. Damn.
That never happened.
Oh, I was gonna say the beauty of federalism, I think, is, to your point, Brownie, you can have ANCAP in your community. And if you want a socialist community, you can have a socialist community. And if you want something in between, you can have some, like, that was the beauty of federalism, is that all these little tribes, we call them states, could get together.
Yes.
Say,
how do you run a scientific experiment? You run multiple parallel experiments. You don't run one at a time.
It's a Monte Carlo simulation. That's what America is. It's just one big political Monte Carlo simulation. And everybody's getting together and figuring out what works best. And then other states can say, oh, hey, we like this thing that they do in Texas. It's called freedom and the Second Amendment. Like, we should
people keeping their own money.
We should probably do that. And stop moving to Texas, California. I'm looking at you, to try to turn it blue. You know, that's the beauty of federalism, is everybody can try, people of like minds can get together, figure out what it is they want to try out, and then figure out what works. And people can look and say, I don't want to live there. Like, me in Utah, so I got the hell out. Or California, you couldn't pay me to live there. And other people, can say, oh no, I like that state. I'm going to go live there. And yes, it will become entrenched. Certain beliefs and ideas will become entrenched. But you know what? You got 50 states to pick from. And if you have my way, you'd have a lot more, because we would just annex the fuck out of Canada and Mexico.
Right.
Sure, right? I mean, I love Texas the way it is, but my goodness, the place is the size of France. We could easily split up.
To say honestly, I mean, if we annex Canada, there'd have to be a lot of rule changes. But I was going to say, I'd be all for that.
I just want to help out my Canadian friends.
Oh yeah, no, believe me, I know. I've been, one of those friends knowing who they are. That honestly, annexing Canada would actually be great. It would make passage between here and there.
And listen, I'm just saying that Cancun is really beautiful, and I think it's wasted on the cartel government.
Exactly. And here's the thing: if we just annex everything south of the border to the Panama Canal, it's a lot easier to build a border fence on the Panama Canal.
Yeah.
That whole stretch of land. I'm saving us money, guys. Come on.
Capital endorsed. #rec.
I like it. Let's do
Ordering
that.
for president 2020. Let's do this.
And listen, I'm telling you, what's the population of Mexico? 100 million? They will welcome it.
Yeah. Well, except the cartel. We'll just put them on the helicopters with the communists. So
It'll be fine.
No. Listen, guys, we're free market. Let's legitimize the cartels. In the NCAP world, there's plenty of room for pharmaceutical quality MDMA for clubbers. Let them go legit. It's okay if you want to do that.
Well, hey, we're always talking about ending the war on drugs. I think that's a good place to start.
We're actually running out of time. We need to have Browning back to talk about drugs and the war on drugs. I think that's going to be a fun debate.
Oh, God, yes.
So. I do know a couple. Yes, let's have Browning back. We're going to be wrapping up, guys. I'm sorry. I was not talking a lot. I know I was getting a lot of those comments, so I apologize, but whatever.
The chat went crazy, so.
We're going to have you back after the new year. Does that sound good for you?
That would be wonderful. I really enjoy you guys.
We enjoy you.
Big ass Hilo.
You say that now.
What we really should do is see if we can coordinate with Hate in Texas. We're having an event down here at the compound for a few shit lords and wrong thinkers and crime lords.
Oh, now that'll be fun. This is going to be the new Silk Road, isn't it?
Silk Road, Opium War, what's the difference?
So wrapping up, commies suck. Watching the left eat itself is a little bit glorious, but we're watching them accept communism out in the open. So please, everyone, buy a helicopter or two. Join the movement. Help us. All right, Browning, thank you so much for coming on the show. Everyone, you can catch him at Browning Machine on Twitter. You can catch John at Kamui Hiryoku, KamuiHiryoku. OYG has no Twitter account, so our Facebook page, Ornery Young Guns, you can watch it post occasionally there. And you can follow me at IHate_everyone too.
And remember, kids, the only difference between a Nazi and a communist is how snazzy the uniform is.
It has been a pleasure. Thank you all very much.
You're welcome, man. Everyone have a great weekend.